Life has a way of surprising you when you least anticipate it. Some encounters arrive so softly that you barely notice them at first, yet they leave marks that last forever. It was a Thursday evening in late October when everything changed. Had been nestled in my armchair, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table, when my nephew appeared at my doorstep. What began as an ordinary visit would evolve into something I never saw coming. But first, let me ask you something. Where are you reading this from tonight? I'm curious about the places these words might travel to. The evening air held that distinctive bite of approaching winter. I had opened the kitchen window earlier to let in the fresh breeze that carried hints of burning wood from neighborhood fireplaces. My reading lamp created pools of soft light throughout the living room, while shadows danced across the bookshelves. I wore my comfortable wool socks and had wrapped myself in an old quilt my mother had made years ago. It was the kind of evening where you expect nothing remarkable to occur. The radio played quietly in the background, some classical station I'd discovered recently. I wasn't really listening, just letting the music fill the silence. Then came the familiar sound of footsteps on my porch, followed by a gentle rap at the door. "Aunt Sarah?" came the voice I recognized immediately. I looked up to see Marcus standing there, his coat unbuttoned, dark hair slightly messed from the evening wind. He was 26 now, though sometimes I still saw traces of the teenager who used to help me plant tomatoes in my garden. Tonight felt different, though. His shoulders carried a new kind of confidence, and his hazel eyes held a depth I hadn't noticed before. "Marcus," I said warmly, setting aside my book. "You're out late tonight." "Just finished dinner with some colleagues," he explained, hanging his coat on the hall tree. "Saw your lights and decided to stop by. Hope that's okay." There was something soothing about having him there. He walked over and settled into the sofa across from my chair, close enough that I could detect the subtle scent of his aftershave mixed with the crisp autumn air that clung to his sweater. We sat quietly for a moment, both glancing toward the radio, but neither really focusing on the music. Outside, I could hear leaves rustling in the maple tree by my front gate. "How have things been?" he asked, turning his attention to me. I lifted one shoulder slightly. "The usual routine. Some weeks are more eventful than others." He nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that feeling." A comfortable pause settled between us. Not awkward, but filled with an unspoken connection. I noticed how his fingers drummed lightly against the sofa arm, not in nervousness, but in a relaxed rhythm. Our conversation began with everyday topics: his new position at the marketing firm, a bookstore that had recently opened downtown, an amusing incident involving his roommate, and a broken washing machine. As time passed, I found myself observing him more carefully, noticing how he truly engaged when I spoke. His focus never drifted the way so many people's does these days. It felt grounding in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When he laughed at something I shared, I realized I was smiling more broadly than usual. His laughter had matured over time, becoming deeper and more resonant, and it awakened something unexpected within me. It wasn't desire exactly, at least not consciously, but there was a warmth there, a recognition that I was still capable of feeling. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window panes gently. The lamplight flickered across his features, illuminating the slight smile that appeared when he glanced my way. "You know," he said eventually, "I've always enjoyed visiting here. Even as a child, your home felt special somehow, peaceful, like a refuge from whatever chaos was happening elsewhere." That observation made my heart flutter slightly. "I'm happy you see it that way," I replied quietly. We remained there longer, discussing everything and nothing at all. There was no urgency, no pressure to fill every quiet moment. The spaces between our words seemed just as significant as the conversations themselves. When the radio program ended, I realized I hadn't once thought about the laundry I'd planned to fold or the emails I'd meant to answer. Something about his company had drawn me completely into the present. When he eventually rose to leave, there was a moment's hesitation. His eyes found mine, as if he wanted to express something more but couldn't find the words. "Good night, Aunt Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle and warm. "Good night, Marcus." After he left, I remained in my chair, the room still holding traces, of his presence. Something fundamental had shifted that evening, though I couldn't articulate what it was yet. I only knew that I felt changed somehow. The following day unfolded like any other on the surface. Morning tea in my favorite ceramic mug, a leisurely stroll through my small garden to check on the last chrysanthemums, a trip to the farmer's market for fresh bread and honey. But fragments of the previous evening kept surfacing in my thoughts. The sound of Marcus's laughter, the way his gaze had seemed to linger on mine, the comfortable quiet that had enveloped us both. I tried to convince myself it had been simply a pleasant visit, nothing more. Yet while arranging the fresh flowers I'd bought at the market, I caught myself humming without realizing it. That's when I understood I was looking forward to seeing him again, though I had no idea when that might happen. Later that afternoon, I had settled onto my porch swing with a magazine. The sun was beginning its descent behind the oak trees lining my street. The sky displayed that particular golden amber color that makes you want to pause and watch the transformation. I was reading an article about herb gardens when I heard the creak of the front gate. Before I could even look up, there was a soft knock at the screen door. When I opened it, Marcus stood there holding a small white box tied with string. His hair was slightly tousled, and the faintest shadow of stubble marked his jawline. "Brought you something," he said, offering the box with that crooked smile I was beginning to recognize. "Thought you might enjoy it." Inside was a slice of lemon cake from the new bakery he'd mentioned. "You didn't need to do that," I said, though my voice carried more warmth than I'd intended. "I wanted to," he replied simply, stepping inside when I gestured him in. We found ourselves back in the living room, though this time I took the sofa beside him rather than my usual chair. Between us sat a small plate with 2 forks and the cake, which still held the faint scent of citrus and vanilla. He inquired about the magazine I'd been reading, and I found myself sharing more than I typically would, about how certain articles made me reflect on my own experiences, the decisions I'd made, and the paths I'd chosen not to explore. Marcus didn't interrupt or seem impatient. His attention was steady and complete, making me realize how rare such focused listening had become. In my world, eventually our conversation shifted. He opened up about a challenging project at work that had been draining his energy, about feeling uncertain about his future direction but not knowing which way to turn. There was an openness in his words that surprised me, and I could sense he wasn't just making conversation. He genuinely needed someone to understand him. "You'll find your way," I said softly, meeting his gaze directly. "Sometimes you don't need every answer immediately. You just need to trust that you'll recognize the right choice when it appears." His eyes remained on mine for an extended moment, and I could see something unspoken there. Gratitude, perhaps, but layered with something more complex. We sat like that for a while, the space between us growing quieter but far from empty. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the curtains at the open window, carrying in the scent of honeysuckle from my neighbor's garden. The lamp beside us cast a gentle glow across his face, highlighting the curve of his jaw and the subtle lines that appeared when he smiled. At one point, we both reached for our water glasses simultaneously. My fingers grazed his briefly, not intentionally, but long enough to make me conscious of every sensation in my hand. His touch wasn't purposeful, but he didn't pull away quickly, either. It lingered for just a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, something shifted once more. We didn't acknowledge it. We didn't need to. The conversation continued, but the awareness remained, settling quietly between us like a shared secret. When it came time for him to go, he paused at the door and looked back at me. "I'm grateful I stopped by," he said. "So am I responded, my voice softer than I'd planned, and like that, he disappeared into the evening, leaving me once again in a space that somehow felt warmer than before. Only now I was beginning to recognize that what I felt transcended simple familial comfort. It was something far more intricate. The next week passed with deliberate slowness, as though time itself was allowing me space to process. I found myself looking toward the street more frequently than usual, wondering if I might see Marcus's blue sedan turning into my driveway. It wasn't restlessness exactly. It was a gentle anticipation, the kind that hums quietly beneath your daily activities without ever fully interrupting them, yet always present. 4 evenings later, just as I was clearing away my dinner dishes, I heard that familiar knock. I didn't need to check the peephole. I knew it was him. When I answered the door, he stood there with his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, wearing a navy pullover and dark jeans. The evening air had mussed his hair slightly, and there was an easiness in his expression, as if seeing me was something he'd been anticipating as well. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Not at all," I replied, stepping back to welcome him inside. We gravitated toward the living room once more, though this time I lit a small candle on the end table. The flame created a soft radiance that merged with the warm lamplight, making the entire space feel more intimate. Marcus took notice. "That's pleasant," he said, leaning slightly toward the candle. "What fragrance is that?" "Lavender and sandalwood," I told him. "It helps the room feel more serene." He smiled faintly, as if my choice revealed something meaningful about me. We began with casual topics. How his week had progressed, the new winter coat I'd been considering before the weather grew colder. But soon our discussion deepened naturally, as it seemed to do with him. He shared more stories from his past, memories I'd never heard despite being part of his life since childhood. One story particularly caught my attention. He described visiting my house during summer breaks when he was younger, how those days had served as a kind of sanctuary for him. "You were always different from the rest of the family," he said. "You really heard people. You picked up on things others missed entirely." Something about his tone, so sincere and unadorned, felt weightier than the words alone suggested. A lull settled over our conversation, and my attention drifted to the light rain beginning to tap against the windows. It fell in gentle, consistent patterns against the glass, the sound wrapping around us like a soft cocoon. I realized then how close we were sitting, closer than that first evening, near enough that the warmth between us was almost palpable. Adjusted my position slightly, and my shoulder brushed against his. I didn't move away, and neither did he. Such a minor contact, yet it made my heartbeat quicken in a way I couldn't dismiss. Marcus's gaze rested on me thoughtfully, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite interpret. It wasn't presumptuous or reckless. It was questioning, as if he was trying to understand the thoughts I was keeping private. He asked about my late husband, something most people avoided mentioning anymore. I shared memories of our happier times, the way we used to spend Saturday afternoons tending the roses, the music that used to fill our kitchen during dinner preparation. I also described the quietness that followed his passing, how the silence had become both a source of peace and a kind of weight. Marcus never looked away while I spoke. When I finished, we simply sat there, with only the sound of rain against the glass. Then quietly, he said, "You're more resilient than you realize." Such a simple observation, yet it settled deep within me, stirring something that felt equal parts appreciation and exposure. We remained like that for what seemed like hours, neither of us moving, the air around us charged but peaceful. There was no urgency to break the spell, no need to analyze it. When he finally departed that night, the sense of rain and sandalwood lingered in the air. I closed the door slowly, my hand remaining on the handle as I stood there, understanding that whatever had been changing between us was no longer just a subtle undercurrent. It was present now, quiet but unmistakable, and it was transforming how I perceived both him and myself. The following days found me moving through my familiar routines with a heightened awareness, as if the atmosphere itself had been altered. Everything felt more vivid. The way the morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, the gentle creaking of the wooden stairs under my feet, the aroma of my afternoon tea, and threaded through it all was the quiet memory of Marcus's presence, the timbre of his voice, the closeness we'd shared without ever naming it. I hadn't expected to see him again so soon, but on Sunday evening, just as the final traces of sunset were disappearing, there was that gentle knock at my door. When I opened, he stood there carrying a paper bag from the Italian restaurant downtown. "They were making fresh pasta when I walked by," he said. "I thought you might be interested in sharing some." I smiled and stepped aside, allowing him entry. The house was dimly lit except for the soft golden glow from the kitchen light. I had been organizing my recipe collection, reading glasses perched on my nose, various index cards spread across the dining table. We settled at the kitchen table this time, unpacking containers of fettuccine and garlic bread. The pasta was still steaming, filling the kitchen with the rich scents of basil and parmesan. There was no hesitation in how we arranged ourselves, our chairs naturally close together, our knees occasionally touching as we shared the meal, as though we'd crossed some unspoken boundary neither of us had acknowledged, but both understood. We talked while twirling the pasta around our forks, sharing stories about favorite meals, travel dreams we'd never pursued, books that had influenced us, and moments we treasured from our respective pasts. There was a substance to our exchange, but it wasn't burdensome. It felt like we were constructing something invisible but real between us. Eventually, the rain returned, starting as a whisper against the kitchen window, then building to a steady rhythm that seemed to wrap the entire house in its gentle embrace. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his arm draped casually across the back of mine, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I caught myself studying him longer than I should have, memorizing the familiar contours of his face but seeing them as if encountering them for the first time. He noticed my gaze, and for a moment neither of us looked away. There was no rush, no need for explanations, just the quiet recognition that something had evolved, something neither of us had orchestrated, but both now acknowledged. "I'm happy I came by tonight," he said softly, as if speaking louder might shatter the moment. "So am I," I replied, my voice steady but hushed. We sat there for a long time, our conversation gradually diminishing until the silences between us became their own form of communication. The world beyond my kitchen seemed to dissolve, leaving only the candlelight I'd lit, the rain, and the gentle presence we created together. When the hour grew late, Marcus finally stood to leave. He lingered at the door, his hand resting against the doorframe as if he wasn't quite ready to step back into the night. "Sleep well, Aunt Sarah," he said, his eyes holding mine. "You too, Marcus." The door closed with a soft sound, and I remained there briefly, my palm still against the wood. The house felt warm, not just from the candle flickering in the kitchen or the quilt I'd draped over my shoulders, but from something deeper, something that had taken root gradually, and now existed in the space we'd created together. I understood that our lives would continue with their established patterns and comfortable rhythms. But I also knew we would carry this with us, this transformation, this recognition, this quiet bond that had grown through shared evenings, unspoken truths, and the simple act of truly seeing one another. And standing there in my hallway, I realized it wasn't about what might unfold in the future. It was about what had already occurred. About understanding that even during the most ordinary nights, something extraordinary can find you and change you in ways you never anticipated. That realization was enough.